I planned perfect weddings for other women my whole life, but on the day of my own, I found out that the man I'd sacrificed everything for was cheating on me with the bridesmaid I loved like a sister. He didn't even ask for forgiveness. He said I was predictable. He said she made him feel alive, and I had to walk into that ballroom, in a white dress, in front of hundreds of people, carrying a humiliation that nearly broke me, until a stranger stood up. Damon Salazar, the most powerful man in Atlanta, walked to the altar, looked me in the eyes, and asked the question that changed everything. Will you marry me? In that moment, I just wanted to survive the shame, but I didn't know that taking that hand would place me beside the most dangerous man in the city, nor that a marriage that began as revenge could become the only place where I'd finally be truly chosen. Hi, I'm Lena. A special shout out to those of you watching Book 1 for free here on the My Stories platform, completely ad-free and uninterrupted. Chapter 1, 20 minutes before the I do. The dress weighed more than I had imagined. I tried it on 3 times before that Saturday, and all 3 times the fabric felt light as a promise. There, in the hallway of the hotel's 7th floor, holding the veil in my hands so it wouldn't drag across the wine-colored carpet, every pearl bead felt like a small stone sewn into my chest. The air smelled of white lily, and the hairspray the bridesmaids had used in excess in the bridal suite, and that sugary mixture gave me a quick wave of dizziness that I swallowed before it turned to nausea. I had planned 180 weddings in 7 years. I knew no bride wanders a hallway before walking into the ballroom, but Bryce had vanished from the groom's suite since 10 in the morning, and I just needed 5 minutes with him before the I do to remind myself why I was doing this. Colette Navarro, I swear on everything holy, if you don't get back to that suite right now, I'm going to drag you by your teased-up hair with a brush. The voice came from behind me, low enough not to draw the attention of the waiters crossing the hallway with trays of glasses. Brenna Calvert, my best friend since college, and the only lawyer in Atlanta capable of arguing a contract and a lipstick shade in the same breath, appeared on her high heels with the skirt of her bridesmaid dress hiked up in her hands. 5 minutes, I murmured, without turning. 5 minutes for what, exactly? To ask him if his tie matches his suit, to check if his dad's had enough to drink not to cry. I know you, Cole. You've got that look of someone about to ask a big, dumb question. I finally looked at her. Brenna had her hair up in an imperfect bun, and her left earring was upside down. That was about as close to chaotic elegance as she ever got. I felt a pang of affection that nearly made me cry too soon. I just need to hear him say he's happy, I answered, and my own voice surprised me with how small it was. Once. Before. Bryce has never said he was happy in his entire life. He says he's fulfilled, that he's achieved, that he deserves. Happy is a word for people who still feel things. I didn't answer. Brenna let out one of those sighs she reserved for lost cases. Go on then. But if you take more than 5 minutes, I'm coming for you with fire. I crossed the hallway and turned right, by the Hall of Mirrors. Bryce had a habit of hiding before important events in any empty room he could find, phone in hand, and a spreadsheet open. I knew, because I was the one who invented that routine for him. Years ago, when a meeting with investors threatened to sink the company we were building together, I locked him in a hotel pantry with a glass of water and the quarterly spreadsheet, and he came out with the calm of a priest. Ever since, disappearing was his way of breathing. The first room was empty. The second, occupied by a catering crew with stainless steel carts that creaked as they were pushed. The third had its door ajar, and through the crack came a low sound that I recognized before I identified it. A woman's laugh, short, stifled in the throat, and then a silence that was no silence at all. I should have left. Any smart woman would have left. But the dress weighed on me, and curiosity weighed more, and the door opened under my hand, as if it had already been waiting for that moment. Bryce had both hands on her face. The light gray suit, the one I'd chosen at the Buckhead Atelier 3 months earlier, wrinkled at the back where her fingers gripped it. Yvette Delgado, my maid of honor, the woman I'd called sister since I was 16, the woman who had tried on my dress with me, who had cried when I showed her the ring, who had written the reception speech. Yvette had her mouth pressed to his, and the lilac bridesmaid dress had ridden up to mid-thigh. The veil slipped from my hands. The sound was minimal. Fabric falling on carpet doesn't make the noise of something breaking, but the two of them sprang apart with the violence of people who'd heard a gunshot, and Yvette brought her hand to her mouth, and Bryce stood there without moving, and none of the 3 of us breathed for a stretch of time I couldn't measure. The room had a single window with the blinds half drawn, and the light coming through in strips lit the dust suspended in the air, that kind of idiotic detail that memory insists on keeping when everything else is falling apart. "Colette," Yvette said, and the name came out broken. The M strange. I didn't look at her. I looked at him. 5 minutes, I said, and my voice came out in a calm that scared me more than anything. "I came for 5 minutes." Bryce took a deep breath. He smoothed his jacket with a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times. Whenever he was getting ready to say something he had decided was the truth. "I was going to tell you." "When?" "Later." "Later than what?" "Bryce. After the wedding. After we got settled. After I found the right time." Yvette started crying softly, her hand still on her mouth, and I felt, with an odd clarity, that those tears weren't for me. They were for her. They were the tears of someone being caught doing something ugly, not of someone who had done something ugly. "You were going to marry me. Today. In 20 minutes. "I was," Bryce repeated, as if repetition could turn the sentence into an explanation. "You're predictable, Colette. You're organized. You take care of things. Yvette makes me feel alive." The word alive fell to the carpet heavier than the veil. I had heard men say horrible things to women before. In 29 years, I had seen every possible form of marital cruelty, but I had never heard a sentence so small contain so much power to dissolve an entire life. 7 years turned to dust. The bills I paid without his knowing, the loan I signed alone when the company nearly folded in the 3rd year, the capital from my mother's inheritance that I threw into the Whitman consulting accounts like someone tossing a coin into a wishing well, everything, became an anecdote in a 4-word sentence. I bent down and picked up the veil. "Colette," Yvette tried again, taking a step toward me. "No," I said, and the single word was so firm she stopped mid-step. "Not you." I looked at Bryce one last time. I searched, honestly, for some crack in his face, some trace of shame, of fear, of longing for the man who had asked me to be his girlfriend at a cheap restaurant in Decatur 7 years before. There was none. The Bryce standing there was whole, the same Bryce as always, and I understood in that second that maybe another one had never existed. I left the room without closing the door. I didn't even give them the courtesy of the latch clicking. The hallway had gotten longer. I walked slowly, because running in heels on that carpet would have meant tripping, and tripping would have meant crying, and crying before reaching somewhere closed off was a luxury I still couldn't afford. The waiters kept passing with trays balanced on one hand. One of them nodded a greeting. I smiled. That smile came off my face with the mechanical competence of someone who had planned 180 weddings and knew a bride never leaves a guest ungreeted. "Brenna," I murmured, as I turned the corner. She was where I'd left her, phone in hand. She looked up and her expression changed so fast that I knew, without a mirror, what my face was saying. "Cole, don't talk right now." "Cole, what?" "Don't talk right now, Brenna. Please." She swallowed the sentence halfway and came to me. She took the veil from my hand without asking. She fixed it in my hair with a delicacy I'd never seen in those hands that drafted petitions and uncorked wine bottles with the same enthusiasm of someone who'd just won a case. "Do you want to leave through the front or through the service exit?" The question broke me more than anything. I looked both ways down the hallway. To the right, the ballroom. To the left, the service door with the little red light marking the emergency exit, opening onto an alley where some of the waiters smoked between trays. To the right, 200 people who had paid for hotel, dress, flight, gift. To the left, the anonymity of a clean escape, no witnesses, no headline in the society column, no pixelated photo on a gossip site Monday morning. For 7 years of my life, I had chosen to always leave through the door that served everyone else best. "Through the front," I said, and the word hurt before it left me. "I'm going through the front." "Cole, you don't have to." "I do. If I leave through the service exit, he'll tell the story his way. For once in my life, I'm going to tell mine." Brenna looked at me the way you look at someone learning to walk right in front of you. She bit her lip. She nodded. "I'll be at your side." "No. Go up front. 2 steps ahead. If any guest tries to ask me something, you push them off. I just need to get to the altar. To speak. To speak." She fixed the crooked bun, fixed the upside-down earring without noticing it was upside down, fixed her skirt. It was a series of gestures she made when she was about to walk into a courtroom. I'd seen it dozens of times. From the gallery, in lost cases she ended up winning. "Let's go," she said. We walked together to the double doors of the ballroom. The remaining bridesmaids were lined up in the foyer, and one of them, a distant cousin of Bryce's I barely knew, Started to smile before noticing Yvette wasn't there. The smile died halfway. I took the bouquet another bridesmaid held out to me. White carnations and eucalyptus. I'd chosen it myself 3 weeks before, on a Tuesday afternoon when I thought I was choosing flowers for the happiest life of my life. The music began. It was the bridal march. In the violin version, I'd negotiated with the quartet for a 15% discount because of the volume of my event calendar. I recognized the first 3 notes the way I'd recognize my own breathing. The doors opened. The hotel ballroom had 208 chairs, and I knew the number because I'd done the seating chart myself. 208 faces turned toward me at the same time. Low chandeliers poured a golden light that made the white hydrangea arrangements in the tall vases look painted, and the ivory satin ribbons tied to the back of each chair rippled faintly in the air conditioning. Everything identical to the design I'd presented to Bryce at the end of January, which he'd approved with a distracted nod while typing on his phone. I took the first step. I didn't cry. I don't know how, but I didn't cry. The bouquet was steady in my hands, and my feet knew the way, because my feet had walked that kind of aisle with other people's brides behind them dozens of times. Brenna walked 2 steps ahead, head held high, with the fixed smile of someone about to take down an overconfident defendant. Halfway down, I saw Bryce. He had arrived before me. He was at the altar, beside the priest, his tie straightened, and the businessman's smile I'd seen in hundreds of event photos. Beside him, in the maid of honor's spot, Yvette had taken her place with the lilac dress flawless, and her hair intact, as if nothing had happened 5 minutes earlier in a private room upstairs. They were there, both of them, as if nothing had happened. I almost laughed. The whole thing was so absurd that the laugh nearly escaped, and I bit the inside of my cheek with a force that drew a small taste of iron. I kept walking. In that instant, with the fresh blood still in my mouth and 208 eyes on my face, I thought something very clearly, that every hotel has 2 exits, and I had chosen the front one, because I wanted to tell my story out loud in front of witnesses, that I would open my mouth when I reached the altar and tell the truth, and that the rest of my life would be rebuilding from that second on. I took a deep breath. I kept walking. What I didn't yet know, and would find out over the next 20 minutes of my life, was that there was a 3rd exit from that hotel, and that it was sitting in the 4th row, to the right of the aisle, in a black suit cut so well it seemed part of the body of the man wearing it. But I didn't know that yet. I just kept walking. Chapter 2. The Stranger in the Black Suit. The altar was 20 steps from me. I counted, not on purpose. My feet counted for me, the way the feet of someone who plans weddings count the center aisle of a hotel ballroom. 20 steps with music in the background. 20 steps to decide how to say, out loud, in front of 208 people, that the groom had kissed the maid of honor 5 minutes before the ceremony. 19 steps. The priest, an elderly man in small glasses who had taken the job on a referral from Bryce's mother, smiled gently. Bryce smiled too, but his smile already had that stiffness of someone who knows something is out of place and doesn't yet know what. I looked into his eyes. I held his gaze for 3 full steps, and saw the first bead of sweat slide from his temple to the collar of his white shirt. Good, I thought. Let him sweat. 17 steps. Brenna reached the altar before me and took her place in the bridesmaids' spot with the posture of someone standing guard. Yvette was on the other side, half a meter from her, and they didn't exchange a glance. I noticed Brenna had her chin turned slightly toward Yvette, like an animal sizing up another animal before the strike. 15 steps. The quartet kept playing. I recognized, with that part of the brain that never shuts off, that the violinist was half a beat behind the viola, a detail I would have corrected at any other wedding, a detail that at this one I let slide, because there were bigger noises inside me taking up all the available space. 10 steps. I already had the line ready. I will not marry this man today. Short, clean, no adjectives. Every guest would leave with the same sentence in their mouth, and when Monday came and the society columns called to confirm the version, everyone would have the same version to confirm. It was as close to control as I could get. 7 steps. That was when the man stood up. I didn't see it right away. I saw the movement first, a shift in the 4th row, to the right of the aisle, that clashed with the stillness of everyone else. Someone rising while the rest of the room sat. I turned my head half a centimeter, without stopping, and saw him. Black suit, black shirt underneath, no tie, dark hair combed back with a precision that seemed like a decision, not vanity. Tall, shoulders too broad for the cut of the jacket, though the jacket had been cut precisely for those shoulders. His face was angular, hard-jawed, and the only thing I could clearly identify was the calm. It was the calm of his face that stood out across the room, as if 207 people were watching a wedding and he was watching something else entirely. 5 steps. Behind him, in the same row, a thinner man with a loose tie whispered something to the guest beside him. I didn't hear it, but I saw the guest beside him widen his eyes, turn discreetly, and look again at the man who had stood up. I didn't know the thinner man either, but the look on the face of the one who'd heard him told me the name he'd whispered carried weight. 4 steps. The man in the black suit left the row. I stopped. I didn't decide to stop. My feet simply stopped, and the bouquet trembled once in my hands before I tightened my grip on the stems. He walked down the center aisle, unhurried, without hesitation, in the opposite direction from where I'd been walking. The music continued 1 measure, then 2, then the violinist finally realized what was happening, and the march died mid-note. The silence was so complete that I heard the ballroom's air conditioning motor. The priest opened his mouth, closed it. Bryce, at the altar, said, "What?" The man in the black suit didn't answer. He didn't look at Bryce. He didn't look at any of the 208 guests now following his path with held breath. He looked at me from the start of the journey to the end, and his gaze had nothing of theater, nothing of gesture, none of the heavy weight that men of that kind of appearance usually carry on purpose. He stopped a meter from me. "Damon Salazar," he said, low, and his voice was deeper than I'd imagined. "We don't know each other." "No," I answered, without understanding why I was answering. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" Here. I looked at the altar. Bryce had taken a step toward us, and I saw Brenna reach out and touch his arm with 2 fingers, a minimal touch that held more threat than any words. Bryce stopped. "Talk," I said to the man. He tilted his head slightly, as if measuring the best way to put the words. When he looked back, he spoke even lower, in a tone only I, he, and the air between us could hear, even though the whole room was glued to the scene. "I saw you walk in. I saw you walk all the way here without crying. I don't know what happened, but I know what I saw. You don't deserve to cry alone today." The sentence cut through me in a way I wasn't prepared to feel. I had a speech plan, an exit plan, a press plan. I had no plan for kindness from a stranger who owed me nothing and gained nothing from it. "Why are you doing this?" I murmured. "Because I can." That's not an answer. It's the only one that fits right now. The others we'll talk about later. I laughed. It was a broken sound, more air than laughter, and he didn't smile back. He kept looking at me with the same firm calm, and I realized, with a strange clarity, that this man wasn't waiting for me to thank him, or to cry, or to faint. He was waiting for an adult answer to an adult question that he hadn't yet asked. "Marry me," he said. It was so low that I thought I'd heard wrong. "What? Marry me. Here. Now." Symbolic ceremony. I'll make it official in the coming days, with everything in place. You can back out at any moment. If you back out tonight, I'll put you in the car and take you wherever you want. No questions, no costs, no headline. But you're not going to leave this room today as the woman who was humiliated. You're going to leave as the woman who chose something else. Behind me, Brenna made a sound in her throat that was half choke, half nervous laughter. Behind him, in the 4th row, the thinner man with the loose tie closed his eyes like someone who had watched something foreseen. At the altar, Bryce started to laugh. It was a short laugh, the laugh of someone trying to convince himself that the whole scene was a joke and would end any second. The laugh traveled 3 rows at the front of the room before stopping abruptly. I looked at Bryce and saw why. The man in the black suit had turned his head, slowly, toward the altar, for the first time since he'd stood up. He said nothing. He did nothing. He just looked. And Bryce's laugh died in his throat as if someone had yanked a thread. "Damon never jokes," someone murmured, 3 rows behind me, and the sentence rippled through the room in a whisper that grew and died in 10 seconds. I didn't know that name. I didn't know that face. I didn't know, in that instant, what he did for a living, who the men were that he took orders from or gave orders to, at what dinner table he had been raised, how many people in the room knew exactly who he was, and how many had just found out like me. I knew one thing only. He had crossed an entire room to spare me from crying in front of 208 people, and he had done it without hesitation, without apparent calculation, without any of the thousands of masks I'd seen men put on at other people's weddings. "You're serious," I said. "Always. I don't know you." "No, I don't even know how to spell your last name right." "Salazar. Old name. On my grandfather's side." We Americanized the pronunciation, but the spelling stayed. I laughed again, and this time the laugh came out whole, and it hurt my throat the way laughter hurts when it comes riding on top of something that hasn't yet turned to tears. Your offering. I am. Why? I already told you. Because I can, and because the other answer is longer than fits right now. I looked at the altar. Bryce was still standing there, and Yvette had brought her hand to her mouth again, the same way she'd brought it in the private room on the floor of the bridal suite. The priest had his Bible open to the wrong page. Brenna had shifted her chin 1/2 centimeter to the side, and I read the whole sentence on her face. Cole, if you don't say yes, I'll say it for you. I looked back at Damon Salazar. The man had the kind of calm you only learn in places where calm is the only thing between you and death. I couldn't prove that sentence, but it appeared in my head whole, formed, with the commas in place, as if part of me already knew something the rest of me was still processing. Yes, I said. The word came out small, almost a breath, but the room was quiet enough that each of the 208 people heard it. Damon nodded, once, without celebrating. A father, he said, loud, and the man in the small glasses nearly dropped the Bible. Short ceremony. Me, her, the I do, from both of us. The rest gets sorted out in the coming days. Sir, I don't. You preside, or I call the judge sitting in the 3rd row, on the left. The priest looked at the 3rd row. A white-haired man, whom I vaguely recognized as a friend of Bryce's father, raised his hand in a minimal greeting confirming that yes, he was a judge, and yes, he would do it. I'll preside, the priest said, in a threat of a voice. Damon held out his hand to me. I looked at his hand before accepting. It was large, broad, with a thin 2-centimeter scar near the thumb, and the ring on his right hand had engraved a figure I couldn't identify at a distance, something crossed with something, dark background. I placed my hand in his. His temperature was normal. Mine was ice cold. We walked together the last 7 steps to the altar. Bryce left his spot without anyone needing to ask. He backed up 3 steps, then 3 more. Then his mother pulled his elbow and sat him in the 1st row beside her. Yvette stayed where she was, frozen, and Brenna said, "Lo," 3 words away from me. "Yvette, leave." Yvette left. The lilac dress disappeared down the side aisle. The priest, his voice trembling, asked whether Damon Salazar accepted to take me, there, as his wife, under the terms he had proposed and would come to formalize. Damon said yes without taking his eyes off me. The priest asked the same of me. I said yes. There was no ring. Damon took the ring off his own right hand, the one with the design I hadn't been able to identify at a distance, and put it on my middle finger, the only one that took the size. It was heavy, cold, engraved, I saw now, with a knife crossed with a rose. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know, when he turned to the crowd still holding my hand and said, "Thank you, everyone," that the sentence closed one wedding and opened another. I didn't know, when he walked with me back down the center aisle toward the double doors, that each of those 208 people would tell that scene for the next 20 years, and that 3 of them were already typing different versions of the story on their phones. I didn't know that the man with the loose tie behind in the 4th row, Trey Vega, I'd find out later, had predicted every move of the last 10 minutes, and that it was exactly why he'd insisted on dragging Damon to a stranger's wedding that Saturday. I didn't know any of that. I only knew I was leaving the ballroom through the front door, as I'd sworn to myself 20 minutes earlier, but that I wasn't leaving alone, and that the hand of the man beside me held mine with a quiet firmness that seemed, against all the logic of the day, the most solid thing I had leaned on in 7 years of my life. Damon opened the ballroom door. The midday sun came in cold and white through the glass of the hotel lobby, and I felt its warmth mix with the air of the ballroom for a single instant before we crossed the threshold. I crossed the threshold, still in my dress, with a heavy ring on my middle finger whose symbol I couldn't decipher, married to a man whose name I barely knew how to spell. Chapter 3. The Mansion of the Man Who Never Jokes. The car was quieter inside than any car I'd ever been in. It wasn't just the muffled engine, nor the dark glass that took Atlanta off the map as if the city didn't deserve to be seen. It was the kind of silence that came from the man sitting beside me, with his elbow propped on the door and the black ring gleaming on his finger, as if the world out there had learned not to make noise near him. The afternoon had given way to a gray end of day while I was still processing the ballroom, and by the time I noticed, the sun was already low, red, spilling over the rooftops. Damon Salazar looked ahead. I looked at my own finger. His ring, heavy, with the knife crossed over the rose, seemed made for another woman's hand, one who understood the design, who knew how to pronounce her husband's full last name without hesitating on the vowel. I was not that woman. I was the bride with the crumpled veil in her lap, the dress dirty at the hem, and a man's wedding band on her middle finger that still hadn't stopped itching her skin. "You're not going to ask me anything," I said, turning my face toward him. "No," he answered, without turning. "Oh, great. It's been a while since I felt this valued in a conversation." His mouth moved slightly, in an almost smile that vanished before I could confirm it had existed. I bit the inside of my cheek so I wouldn't laugh. It was an old flaw of mine. When the fear rose, the sarcasm rose faster. Brenna always said I'd crack a joke at my own funeral. Damon, at last, turned. He had eyes that didn't ask permission to examine a person. Dark, direct goal, with the particular quality of someone who'd seen too much to fake surprise. "I'll ask when you want me to ask," he said, in that low voice of a man who'd never needed to raise it. And not before. I didn't know what to answer. I looked out the window. Atlanta passed in flashes across the tinted glass. Lampposts, lit facades, the side of an overpass I recognized before I stopped recognizing anything at all. The car left the streets I knew and turned onto a tree-lined road I'd never seen, even though I'd lived in this city my whole life. That was the feeling. Discovering that my city had entire floors I didn't even know existed. The mansion appeared all at once, after a tall gate that opened on its own. It was dark stone, with tall, narrow windows, and nothing about it tried to look friendly. The exterior light was cold, calculated, illuminating the outlines without revealing the interior. It had the air of a house that knew what it was and wasn't interested in pleasing anyone. It matched the owner. The car stopped. Damon got out first, opened my door, held out his hand. I hesitated a second longer than I should have. He waited. He didn't say a "come on." He didn't say a "let's go." He stood there with his hand extended in the dusk, completely at ease with my silence, as if he had all the time in the world and never needed to compete for it with anyone. I placed mine in his. His skin was warm. Mine had been ice cold for a couple of hours. At the entrance, a tall man in a dark suit waited with his hands clasped in front of him. Broad shoulders, short hair, the neutral expression of someone who made it his trade. He bowed his head when he saw me. "Ma'am," he said. I almost looked behind me to see if there was another woman. Cassian Holt, Damon introduced him, without ceremony, head of the house's security, of my security, and, as of today, of yours. "Pleased to meet you," I said. "The pleasure was for whoever watched that ballroom," Cassian answered, his voice even. "They'll be talking about it for 10 years. I looked at Damon. Damon looked at Cassian. "That was humor," Damon explained, like someone translating a foreign language for his wife. "You get used to it." "I'm getting used to a lot of things today," I murmured. And this time Cassian moved the corner of his mouth a couple of millimeters. I counted. The house's entrance was a double-height foyer, with dark flooring and a low chandelier that poured an amber light over everything. There were no flowers on the hall table. There were no portraits. It was the house of a man who didn't display what he felt, if he felt anything at all. Damon walked and I followed. We crossed a hallway paneled in dark wood, passed through a double door of iron and glass, and entered a library that occupied 2 whole floors. There was a wrought iron staircase rising to the gallery. There was a low wooden table, 2 dark leather sofas, an armchair near the window. The smell was of old paper, and something faintly smoky. Wood, maybe, or the kind of candle no one uses anymore. There were books, many of them, with worn spines and pages that curled at the edges, not the decorative library I'd planned in 24 houses in Buckhead, with volumes chosen by cover color. It was a used library. Damon Salazar read. I noted that in my head as if it were a piece of military intelligence. "Sit," he said, gesturing at the sofa. I sat. The leather was cold, but my body warmed the space quickly. The dress wrinkled in a way that pinched at the sides, but I wasn't going to take off the dress in front of that man. Damon walked to a dark wood sideboard in the corner, poured water into a low glass, and handed it to me without ceremony. He didn't pour me alcohol. I thanked him silently. Drinking and the night I was having would have ended badly. He remained standing. "I'll be direct," he began. "The ceremony in the ballroom was symbolic. In front of more than 200 witnesses. It's enough for what I needed to do there, but it's not legal. To make it so, I'll have it arranged in the coming days. A private registry office, no press, no spectacle. It takes 20 minutes. I looked at the glass. I looked at him. And if I don't want to, Then there's no registry office, he said, without changing expression. You spend the night here, or in any hotel in the city, under my name, with the door locked and Cassian's people out front. Tomorrow morning, if you decide that the thing in the ballroom was a mistake, I'll give the press conference myself, saying it was a gesture, and that it ended as a gesture. You don't get humiliated. You get free. I swallowed the sip of water without needing it. You're offering me a way out, I said, slowly. I'm offering a choice, he answered. A way out and a choice aren't the same thing. I stared at the man in the middle of his library, in the black suit without a crease, with the ring identical to the one on my finger, and I thought of the simplest and most dangerous thing of the night. That man wasn't charging me anything. Bryce had charged me for 7 years. Time, silence, ambition I financed with my own dreams. Yvette had charged me over a whole lifetime of friendship. My mother, at rest, had charged me the whole time from the grave. And there, in that library smelling of old paper, a stranger in a suit was offering me the one thing no one had ever offered me. The open door, with no price, no condition. And that's why I decided to stay. I'll stay, I said. He nodded just once. There was no celebration, no visible relief, but I swore I saw his left shoulder drop a couple of centimeters, as if something had let go inside him. Cassian will show you the room, he said. Guest room, not mine. Tonight, you sleep alone. Are you always like this? Or are you making an effort? I asked, before thinking. Always, he answered. But today, I'm making an effort too. I left the library before I laughed in his face and couldn't stop. The guest room was on the 2nd floor, at the end of the east hallway. The floorboards didn't creak. The light was diffuse, from lamps, not from the ceiling. Cassian opened the door, showed me where the bathroom was, pointed to an armchair near the window, and said, in the same even voice as before, the phone on the nightstand dials straight to me. Anything, insomnia included. You have a protocol for insomnia? I asked. No, but you'll be the first. Cassian left. I was alone for the first time in hours. I took off my shoes and felt the cold floor under my feet as if it were the first real surface of the day. I sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at the heavy black ring on my middle finger and tried, for a couple of minutes, to feel something specific. Anger, shame, relief, fright. Nothing nameable came. What came was an exhaustion so vast that I lay down without turning back the covers and slept in my dress, with the veil wrapped around my arm like an old stuffed animal. I woke up in the dark, not knowing the time. The bedroom door was closed. On the nightstand, there was a steaming cup of tea and a saucer with 2 slices of toast. No one had knocked. No one had spoken. The tea was exactly the right kind of hot. Not scalding, not lukewarm, exactly the point where you want to hold the cup with both hands. The toast was cold, but the saucer was clear of crumbs, as if the person who'd brought it cared about how the tray looked. I sat up in bed. I picked up the cup with both hands. The smell reached me before the sip. Chamomile, and something citrusy that took a second to recognize. I drank. It was exactly the kind of tea my mother made when I couldn't sleep at 11 years old. Chamomile with bergamot, served without sugar, in a thick porcelain cup. There was no way Damon could know that. No way. But the tea was there, and it was exactly that one. I set the cup down slowly on the saucer, and it was the first time, in 24 hours, that my eyes truly burned. I didn't cry. I drank all the tea. I ate half a slice of toast. I lay back down, and I understood, without needing to think much, that this man was dangerous in a way I didn't yet have a way to measure. The next 3 days passed with the strange rhythm of large houses, full of people working and yet silent. Damon left early in the morning, came back at the end of the afternoon with a discreetly different suit, asked if I'd needed anything, and left me in peace with the single requirement that I have dinner at the table. The 2 of us ate, sometimes without exchanging 10 sentences, with Cassian appearing now and then to hand over an envelope that Damon opened without comment. On Tuesday morning, after breakfast, Damon said, without theater, the registry office is today, at 3, private, 5 minutes from downtown, if you still want it. I looked out the breakfast room window. The sun was coming in at an angle, hitting the rim of the cup I was holding and making a triangle of light on the wood floor. I thought of my mother. I thought of the private room at the hotel. I thought of my whole life, in which I had signed contracts, receipts, and loans in Bryce's name, with the same ease with which I signed birthday cards. For once, I wanted to sign something thinking about what I was signing. I want it, I said. The registry office was a discreet room, with light wood flooring, a white-haired notary, and 2 clerks. Cassian stood at the door with his arms crossed, and the expression of someone who would do this until the end of the world. Brenna, whom I'd warned by phone at breakfast, arrived running, no makeup, folder under her arm and her hair in a bun, she herself called the legal emergency bun. When she saw me, she stopped at the door and breathed. Call. She hugged me tight, and I smelled her perfume, the same as always, and I had to close my eyes for a second. If that man does anything wrong, I won't sue. I'll bury him. Brenna, he can hear you, I whispered. Good. Let him hear. Damon, on the other side of the room, tilted his head once. Brenna narrowed her eyes. Me, in the middle, decided I was going to need a couple of years to mediate those two. I signed on the indicated line. Damon signed on the one above. The notary pronounced my name as Salazar's wife with the respect of someone who knew that surname carried more than it appeared. We left through the back door. In the car, I said, before the silence could swallow me. The press will find out. They will, Damon answered. When? Before dinner. It was before lunch. At 1 p.m, the most read portal in Georgia put up a headline that would run across the country. Tycoon Damon Salazar marries in surprise ceremony after altar scandal at Whitman wedding. Within 2 hours, there were reporters on the corner by the mansion's gate. Cassian increased the detail without anyone asking. Brenna's phone didn't stop. Mine, I turned off. Damon didn't comment on anything in front of me all day. But, passing by the library to grab a book, I heard his voice low in another room, speaking in 3 short sentences with someone on the phone. I couldn't make out the words. I made out the tone. It was the tone of someone solving something without asking the problem's opinion. That night, Brenna showed up with a bottle of red wine and a leather folder under her arm. Folder because I work. Wine because I'm not made of stone, she said, kicking off her shoes into a corner of the library without ceremony. Sit down, Mrs. Salazar. We're going to talk until this press gets tired. Brenna, it's 8 p.m. Then grab a big glass. I laughed for the first time in 3 days. The laugh came out hoarse, as if the mechanism had rusted from disuse, and Brenna laughed along. And for a second the enormous library felt like a livable place. Damon was standing near the wrought iron staircase, a closed book in his hand. He looked at me when I laughed. He looked a second longer than he needed to, with a quiet attention that wasn't curiosity. It was something else, heavier and less nameable. Then he looked away, opened the book, and pretended to read. I swore, hand on my glass, that he didn't turn a single page. Brenna stayed until midnight. She left swearing she'd come back the next day with a formal list of questions. Because that's how you love Cole, with formal questions. Cassian walked her to the gate, with the expression of someone who'd chosen that profession for the pleasure of not having to answer to journalists. I stayed in the library with Damon. Are you okay? He asked, without lifting his gaze from the book. No, I answered, but I'm laughing. It's been about 3 days since I laughed. That counts as progress. He nodded. He didn't come to me. He didn't touch me. But, passing by the door on his way out, he spoke without turning, his voice low and without inflection. Tomorrow I'll have more tea brought. The chamomile with bergamot. You liked it. The door closed before I could answer. I sat in the library, with the empty glass and the noise of the gate outside settling back into silence, looking at the spot where he'd been, and realizing something I didn't want to admit so soon. I was in the library of his mansion, at midnight, laughing, and that man still looked at me as if he were working out an equation whose answer he couldn't stop trying to solve. Chapter 4. In front of everyone again. 2 weeks inside a house do things to time. The days stop being Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and turn into mornings, afternoons, nights, colored blocks that repeat with small variations. I woke up in the guest room, came down to the breakfast room, found the right tea in the right place, and Damon Salazar on the other side of the table, reading the printed paper like a man from the last century. He'd lift his face. I'd sit. Good morning, he'd say. Good morning, I'd answer. That was the protocol, and the protocol held me up. In the afternoon, I started to notice the house through its details. The library books had margin notes made in pencil. The back garden windows looked out onto a row of magnolias that would only bloom a few months from now. Damon's bedroom, I learned from a distance, down the hallway, had a double door, always closed, with Cassian passing by 3 times a day. It was a house that watched without showing it watched. On the 8th day, I went down to the garden alone. The sun was lazy, the grass was wet with recent dew, and I walked toward the stone bench near the magnolias with no destination. Damon was there, sitting, with a cup in his hand and a closed book beside him. I almost turned back. "Sit," he said, without looking. I sat. There was no room to spare. His knee ended up 3 fingers from mine. "And do you always wake up first?" I asked. "Always. Because of work? Because of habit?" He turned the cup slowly in his hands. It was the first time I noticed he had a small white scar on the knuckle of his right middle finger. I didn't ask. I knew, for some reason, that I shouldn't ask. "My mother," he said, without my asking. "She woke up early. I got my body used to it. When she died, my body kept going." I turned my face toward him slowly. Damon didn't look back. He kept looking at the nearest magnolia, as if it were the reason he was saying this. "She was humiliated by my father," he continued, his voice low. "In front of 200 people. I was 8 years old. I remember every detail, including the dish that was on the table when she left the ballroom. I couldn't do anything. 8 years old." He drank the rest of his coffee. He set the cup down. "I tell you this because you deserve to know what looked at you from that 4th row." I was speechless. I swallowed hard. I wanted to put my hand on his hand, and I didn't. I didn't know if he wanted it. He turned only his face, and his eyes were darker than in the morning. "I didn't stand up to rescue you," he said. "I stood up because I wasn't going to be able to watch." "Damon," I whispered. "It's not a romantic confession." He propped his elbows on his knees. "It's a warning. I'm not a man who does things because he's kind. I do them because I can't not do them." I looked at the black ring on my finger. I looked at the white scar on his finger. There, on the stone bench. I understood for the first time why he had crossed the ballroom, and I understood too that it didn't diminish what had happened. On the contrary, it magnified it. "Thank you," I said. "Even so." He stood. He picked up the cup and the book. Before going, he stayed still a second, and his hand came toward my face. I held my breath. His fingers only grazed my hair, fixing a strand that had fallen over my cheek. It wasn't a long gesture. It was a gesture that fit in half a second, but it was the first time he'd touched me since he'd put the ring on my finger. His skin was warm. Mine, this time, was too. He went inside. I stayed. That night, Trey Vega came to dinner. It was the first time I saw him up close. He was a tall man, broad shoulders, easy laugh, the kind who fills a room just by the way they walk in. He kissed my hand as if we'd known each other for years. "My partner's wife," he said. "You have no idea the trouble I went through to drag this guy to your wedding." "Trey," Damon warned, low. "I'm just explaining to the lady that she owes me one." Trey winked. "I insisted for 3 weeks. I had to talk to his mother, and mind you, his mother's been at rest for 20 years. I laughed. Damon rolled his eyes. It was the first time in history I saw Damon Salazar roll his eyes. I noted it. The whole dinner was like that. Trey telling stories that made Damon look like a 20-year-old kid who'd done something stupid on a trip. Damon correcting details in a tired voice, and me laughing with my mouth full for the first time in weeks. At the end, Trey put his hand on his friend's shoulder and said, in a lower voice, "This one's worth it, Colette. I know he seems like a safe, but he's worth it." "I know," I heard myself answer. Damon looked at me from across the table. Trey left before midnight. The next morning, I woke up before an alarm I hadn't even set. The house was still in the blue dark that precedes sunrise, and I lay there a long while, listening to the sounds the mansion made when it thought no one was paying attention. The discreet creak of a window on some floor, the distant sound of water running through a pipe, footsteps in the downstairs hallway, light, which I'd already learned to recognize as Cassian making the first round of the day. I got up. I put on the robe that had appeared in the closet without anyone commenting, my exact size, which unsettled me and comforted me in equal measure. I went down barefoot. The dark wood floor was cold under my feet, and each step felt like a small decision made in the dark. Damon was in the library. It was too early for any normal person to be awake, but I'd already understood he wasn't a normal person in that regard. He was standing before the back shelf, a book open in his hand, and the low light of the lamp cutting his profile against the worn spines. "You don't sleep," I said, from the door. "I sleep. Little. Always." He closed the book slowly, marking the page with his finger before setting it on the table. "Since childhood. My mother used to say I was born in a hurry to see the day begin." He paused, and I noticed it was the second time he'd mentioned his mother without my asking. I think my body never unlearned it. I crossed the library and sat on the dark leather sofa. pulling my knees close to my chest under the robe. Damon didn't come sit beside me. He stayed where he was, leaning against the shelf, and there was in that distance a kind of respect. I still didn't know where to fit inside me. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You can? Do you regret it? Standing up in that ballroom?" He took a while to answer. He looked at the book resting on the table, then at the window where the first gray light was starting to beat the blue. "No," he said, finally. "I regret a lot of things in life, Colette, but not that." I didn't know what to say. I stayed there, on the cold sofa. My body was slowly warming, looking at that man who had entered my life like a door I didn't know existed. Out there, the city was beginning to wake without making a sound, and I thought, with a clarity that scared me a little, that it had been years since I'd spent a whole morning without having to organize someone else's morning. I went up to the guest room thinking that maybe one night I wouldn't sleep in the guest room forever, but I slept there. For now. On the Saturday of the second week, Damon asked me to go out. It was the first time. He said there was a restaurant downtown that closed for him sometimes, that the food was good, that he wanted to take me. I put on the dark blue dress Brenna had sent over on Thursday. Cassian drove, Damon, beside me, in the back seat. The restaurant was exactly what he'd described. Closed, small, 3 tables set for us and no one else. We ate slowly. We talked about things that weren't about Bryce, nor about the press, nor about the mob, nor about the registry office. We talked about Atlanta, about Tuscany. I said, for no reason at all, that I'd always dreamed of seeing a vineyard in Tuscany, about the book he was reading, about the magnolia that would bloom 3 months from now. I didn't even know what blooming was that night. I just was. We left around 11. The street was nearly empty. The car was half a block away. Cassian opened the restaurant's back door and signaled for us to wait. Bryce was leaning against a lamppost 20 steps away, and I knew, without having to ask, that he'd paid someone on the inside to tip him off about the address. I froze. He walked toward us, hands in his pockets, unhurried. His smile was the kind I'd seen 1,000 times in 1,000 meetings, the smile he used to convince investors he had everything under control. Damon didn't move. Cassian took a discreet step forward, and Damon raised 2 fingers. Cassian stopped. "Colette," Bryce said, stopping 3 steps away. "Can I talk to you?" "No." 5 minutes. "No." He pretended not to hear. He looked at Damon, measured the black suit, measured the silence, measured the ring on my finger. "I made a mistake," Bryce said, in the voice he thought was sincere. "I know. I came here to tell you." "You came here," I answered slowly, "because your company dropped 30% on the market in 15 days, and because you found out half your contracts were signed in my name." His face wavered a second. It went back to the smile. "Cole, don't be like this. I can explain." "Bryce," I said, "leave. You're with this guy out of spite." He jerked his chin toward Damon. "Everybody knows. The whole press knows. This marriage is a front, and tomorrow it'll be written in big letters on the front page, because I'm going to call the reporter myself." I opened my mouth to answer. Damon was faster, not with his voice, with his body. He turned toward me, put his hand on my face, the whole palm on my jaw, his thumb touching the corner of my mouth, and kissed me. The kiss was not a performance. A performance would have been in a hurry. That one had calm. He leaned in. I closed my eyes before thinking. His mouth met mine like someone finding an answer. It was warm. It was firm. It was slow. I gripped his sleeve with my fingers before I realized it. I smelled the collar, dark wood and something citrusy I'd already smelled from a distance in the library. I felt his breath hit my face between one time and the next. I felt the black ring brush against my finger. When he pulled away, it was a centimeter, no more. His forehead rested against mine. He spoke into my ear, his voice so low it was only for me. "You okay?" "Yes," I whispered. He turned toward Bryce. He didn't let go of my face. He kept his hand exactly where it was. "Call your reporter," Damon said, without raising his voice. "Send the photo. Say whatever you want, but get it right. Whitman, say that the woman you humiliated married me. Say that every cent that built this company of yours came out of her pocket. Say that you will not come within 3 steps of her as long as I'm breathing. If you get the story wrong, I'll correct it in the next edition. And you won't like my correction." Bryce opened his mouth. No sound came out. "Good night," Damon concluded. "Cassian will wait for you to leave before we do." Cassian took half a step to the side. Bryce looked at me one more time, and this time I recognized the look. It was the look of someone who had lost. I had never seen Bryce with that look. He turned and walked away down the sidewalk. without running, without dignity. Damon kept his hand on my face until the car had its door open. I got in. He got in after me. Cassian drove back without saying a single word. On the way, I couldn't speak. Damon couldn't either. His hand found mine on top of the seat, in the middle of the silence, and stayed there. I looked out the window. Atlanta passed slowly. I didn't cry. I smiled once, and he squeezed. On the mansion's veranda, afterward, with a blanket over my shoulders and a glass of water in my hand, I finally said, "That wasn't theater." "No," Damon answered. "It wasn't." "Damon, I know too." He turned. He leaned his back against the veranda railing, arms crossed, the white shirt, no jacket. For the first time he seemed less the boss of anything, and more a man who had just done something he hadn't calculated quite right. "I hadn't planned it," he admitted, his voice low. "I told you everything here I calculate. Not that. It's okay," I said. "It's not. It is, Damon." I leaned the glass against the railing. "For the first time in a long while, it is." He looked at me for a long time. He didn't try to kiss me again. I didn't try either. We knew. We didn't need to. I went up to the guest room. I slept. I woke up late, with the sun already high. The first thing I saw was the phone vibrating beside the pillow. The second was Brenna calling 3 times in a row. I answered. "Cole." Her voice was upright, alert. "Have you seen the paper?" "No." "Okay. Sit down before you open it." I sat down. They published a photo. You and him, mouth on mouth, on the restaurant sidewalk. Front page. "What do you mean, front page?" "Front page, Cole, big headline, shot from above, so you could see everything. And the caption," Brenna breathed. "The caption says, 'A sham marriage. Bryce Whitman accuses Atlanta tycoon of a farce to humiliate his ex-fiancé.'" I closed my eyes. I stood up. I walked to the window. Down below, at the mansion's gate, I saw from a distance 3 cameras already in position. Cassian was out front, holding the line, with the 2 new men beside him. The bedroom door knocked softly. Damon opened it without coming in. He had the paper folded under his arm, black suit, tie on, the closed face of someone who had already read everything before offering it to me. "Brenna called you," he said. "She did. Come with me to the kitchen." He handed me the paper. "We decide today what we're going to respond." And when I took the paper, I looked at the photo. It was a beautiful photo. It was, I admitted with shame in some corner of my head, a photo that looked like truth, because it had been truth. I lifted my eyes to Damon, still on the threshold of the door. "Damon," I said. "Yes, they still don't know what's in this house." He held my gaze. "No," he said, "and they won't find out from Whitman's mouth." The door closed behind him. I looked at the paper again. The caption was already in my chest, in big letters, the kind that would dictate headlines for the rest of the week. "Sham marriage," and I, with the warm mark of his thumb still at the corner of my mouth, knew I was going to have to prove otherwise in front of the world. Chapter 5. Out loud, in front of the world. 4 days after the photo on the front page, the headline had become an epidemic. "Sham marriage," repeated on every portal, every society column, every morning gossip show. I woke up on Wednesday with my phone vibrating nonstop on the nightstand and the smell of coffee rising from the floor below. The guest room was silent, the door closed, and the house downstairs had already been moving for hours. For 4 days, Damon had been waking up before the sun and going straight to the kitchen, where Cassian waited for him with folders, phone calls, and silence. I came down in my robe, hair loose, not brave enough to look in the mirror before the first sip. I found the 2 of them at the counter, a map of newspapers spread across the black stone. Damon was in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, the family ring reflecting the cold morning light. Cassian, leaning against the fridge, held a mug that looked tiny in his hands. "Good morning," I said, quietly, and Damon raised his eyes before the second syllable came out. "Sit," he answered, and pushed a cup of black coffee toward me. No sugar, exactly how I'd started taking it inside that house. "Brenna's on her way." Cassian greeted me with a short nod. "Mrs. Salazar." "Cassian, I already told you to stop that." "You did," he agreed, without moving a muscle in his face. "I heard." Damon lifted the corner of his mouth enough for me to notice, and went back to looking at the paper open between us. The photo of the kiss on the restaurant sidewalk took up half the front page. Bryce didn't appear in the image, but his quote was there, in big quotation marks, as if it were the only truth in the world. Sham marriage. 4 days later, It still hurt to read. The doorbell rang. Cassian went out, unhurried. He came back in less than a minute with Brenna behind him, high heels clacking on the kitchen floor, folder under her arm, sunglasses still on her face. "Good morning, family," she said, and tossed the folder onto the counter with the ease of someone tossing a loaded weapon. "I brought the strategy. Did you bring decent coffee?" Damon pushed a cup toward her without saying anything. Brenna took off her sunglasses, stared at the headline, and let out a low sound that was half laugh, half curse. Bryce did it. He turned himself into a secondary character in his own scandal. She pulled out a stool and sat. "I'd call. We've got two options. We sue for defamation, drag it through civil court for 2 years. He becomes a martyr. We lose because the public gets tired. Or, I asked, or you two show up. Together, today, speak head on." She looked at Damon. "Do you agree?" Damon didn't answer right away. He set down the cup, crossed his arms on the counter, and looked at me. I knew that look now. It was the look of someone who'd decided on the inside before his mouth opened. "Press conference," he said, low. "Salazar Group headquarters. 11 o'clock. Cassian already had the phone to his ear before the sentence ended. "You won't be used as a shield," Damon continued. "And it was for me. Only for me. You'll go because you choose to go. If you say no, I'll go alone. If you say yes, we walk in together and I'll speak first so you don't need to say anything. If you want to speak, speak. If you want to stay quiet, stay quiet." Brenna raised an eyebrow in my direction, waiting. I drank the coffee slowly. I looked at the photo of the kiss. I remembered the veranda, his hand on my face, the low sentence he'd said about no longer acting. I remembered the cup of chamomile and bergamot tea that had appeared on my nightstand weeks earlier, with no note, no demand, like someone setting a discreet anchor on a woman adrift. "I'll go," I said, "and I'll speak." Damon held my gaze a second longer than he needed to. "Are you sure?" "I am." Cassian, on the other side of the kitchen, without taking the phone from his ear. 11 o'clock confirmed. Boss, front gate filtered. 4 big cameras confirmed. 26 press vehicles. Brenna closed the folder. "Then we have 2 hours to turn you into a woman who isn't bleeding. Go take a shower." I chose a black dress, not for mourning, for armor. Long sleeves, high collar, knee length, nothing shiny, nothing that would distract. Brenna pinned my hair in a low bun while reciting the strategy under her breath, and Damon waited in the hallway, outside the room, as if coming in were asking too much. When I came out, he was already in a black suit, black shirt, no tie, the family ring on his middle finger, the same ring, in a smaller version, on mine, knife crossed with rose. I'd never had the courage to take it off. "Ready?" he asked. "No," I answered. "Let's go." He laughed through his nose, low, and offered me his arm. The Salazar Group headquarters occupied a whole building in downtown Atlanta, dark glass from floor to ceiling, with the family's discreet emblem carved in metal above the revolving door. I had never been inside before. The main ground floor hall was an enormous space with a double ceiling height, black marble, and a single improvised podium at the back, against a clean wall, where there was only the company name in small letters. The press was already seated, cameras from 4 stations mounted in a row, journalists standing with microphones, photographers fighting for angles. Cassian cleared a path ahead of us without touching anyone. His size alone was enough. Behind us, Brenna followed with the folder pressed against her chest. Damon stopped before the podium. He waited for silence. He didn't ask for silence. He waited, and the hall went quiet in under 10 seconds, because even those who had never crossed paths with him understood, in that instant, that asking wasn't his way. "Good morning," he began. His voice filled the hall without needing a microphone, but the microphone was there, and he used it sparingly. "I didn't come here to apologize for anything. I came here to dismantle a lie." Pause. No one breathed. "A little over 2 weeks ago, on the day I met Colette Navarro, I stood up in a wedding hall and offered her a symbolic ceremony. 3 days later, we formalized it legally at a registry office, with a witness, with no coercion, no prenuptial agreement, no time clause. The documents are with the attorney Brenna Calvert, who will distribute certified copies at the end of this press conference, to anyone who wants to check them." Brenna lifted the folder a centimeter. The flashes went off. Bryce Whitman declared, in an anonymous interview with a columnist, that this is a sham marriage. Damon paused briefly, and it was in that pause that I saw the whole room lean forward. Bryce Whitman is the man who cheated on Colette 20 minutes before her own ceremony, with her maid of honor. Bryce Whitman is the man who, for 7 years, received money, work, signatures, and credit from a woman he treated like a silent and disposable partner. Bryce Whitman has, at this moment, exactly one reason to be interested in my marriage: the fear that this woman will, finally, discover the size of what he owes her. The hall was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning. I don't need to prove that I love my wife to any journalist in this room, Damon continued, and his voice dropped a tone, grew denser, as if he were speaking to me and not to the cameras. I need to prove it to her. And for that, I don't use a microphone. He turned his body. He looked at me. I was standing, 3 steps behind him, beside Brenna. The cameras turned with me. But today, he said, without taking his eyes off my face, today I make an exception, because the world thought it had the right to comment on what's happening inside my house, and I'd rather close that door for good. He took a deep breath. I saw his chest rise. I had never seen Damon take a deep breath before speaking. I love Colette. 3 words. Reading nothing. No ceremony. No soundtrack. His voice caught on the 3rd word, and he didn't try to hide it. I felt the whole hall swallow hard at the same time. I love Colette, he repeated, lower, as if the first time had been for the others and the second was just for me. And whoever says otherwise, in any outlet, anywhere, will have to prove what they said in a courtroom, with Brenna Calvert on the other side of the table. Good luck with that. Brenna smiled for the first time since she'd arrived at the house. It was a short, sharp smile, the smile of a lawyer who loves her own work. No questions, Damon concluded. Good afternoon. He stepped off the podium. He came toward me. He stopped in front of me. He didn't kiss me. Not there. Not for any camera. He just held out his hand. I placed mine over his. Cassian cleared a path ahead. Brenna covered the rear. We left the hall with 26 press vehicles shouting questions that none of us answered. The armored car waited in the underground garage. Cassian took the wheel. Brenna grabbed her own car and promised to text when she got home. Damon sat beside me in the back seat, and the door closed with that heavy, safe vault sound I'd already begun to associate with peace. For a while, neither of us spoke. I looked at my hands in my lap. They'd been trembling throughout the entire press conference, and I only noticed now, because they'd stopped. You spoke, I said, finally, without turning my face. I did. Out loud. Out loud. I turned. He was looking at me as if he'd been waiting for that question for 4 days. Why? Damon took a second to answer. Because it's true, and because I'm tired of keeping the truth inside me thinking it stayed safer there. I didn't know what to say. I leaned my head against the leather seat and closed my eyes. I felt his hand find mine in the space between us. No force, no squeeze, just presence. Cassian drove to the mansion without saying a word, and the afternoon light hit the windows as if the world had forgotten there was a scandal out there. The mansion was silent when we arrived. The household staff had been dismissed early. Damon's instruction, I found out later. Cassian said goodbye at the gate. Boss, ma'am, Cassian, Damon answered. Thank you. You're welcome, he said. And it was the first time I heard Cassian say, you're welcome, with no dry joke behind it. We went up the stairs without arranging it. I went to the room to change. Damon went to the library. When I came down, barefoot, in a long silk nightgown covered by a light robe, he was standing before the corner shelf, turning a bottle of wine in his hand without opening it. You don't drink? I said, stopping at the door. No, he set the bottle down. I was just holding something. I laughed through my nose and crossed the library slowly. The room smelled of his woodsy perfume and the old paper of the books he collected without ever reading in front of me. The curtains were half closed, the light low, the silence thick. I stopped in front of him. Damon looked down, at my face, and this time he didn't hide what I'd already begun to read in him weeks ago. You spoke out loud, I said again, because I needed to hear it coming out of my mouth. I know, you shouldn't have had to. I wanted to. He lifted his hand. He touched my face. His long fingers traced my cheek, ran along the line of my jaw, stopped behind my ear. I closed my eyes. I felt his thumb slide down to the corner of my mouth and stop there. There was no hurry in anything that man did. Colette. Look at me. I opened my eyes. He was close. So close, I could feel his breath hit my forehead. Today, in front of those cameras, I did something I swore I'd never do, he said, low, and I don't regret it, but I need you to know it wasn't a performance. It was, he searched for the word, a choice, a whole one. I put my hand over his hand, the one still on my face. I know. You do. I do. He kissed me. It wasn't the kiss from the restaurant sidewalk, with contained fury and Bryce watching. It was a lingering kiss. No audience, no contest, no proof. His hand slid from my cheek to the nape of my neck, and I felt its weight settle there as if it had always been its place. His other arm found my waist under the robe, unhurried, not invading, just resting. When he pulled away, it was only enough to bring his forehead to mine. We stayed like that for a stretch of time I couldn't measure. I felt his heart beat through his pulse. Against my hand, I took his hand. I brought it to my mouth. I kissed his long fingers, one by one, saying nothing. And then I went up the stairs with him. The door of the master bedroom, not the guest room, not anymore, closed behind us with a low, definitive sound. Unhurried, I woke up first. The sunlight came in through the cracks in the heavy curtain and drew light stripes across the white sheet. Damon was lying on his back. I had never seen Damon sleep on his back. In the previous weeks, when I woke before him by mistake, he was always on his side, shoulders tense, one hand near the nightstand where I knew a gun stayed that he'd never needed to show. This time, no. His arms open, one of them crossing my pillow, his chest rising and falling slowly, his mouth slightly parted, his dark hair fallen over his forehead. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked like just a man sleeping, without the weight of everything he carried awake. I lay watching. I couldn't look away. It was an ordinary Thursday morning, in Atlanta, in a mansion that 3 weeks earlier I didn't even know existed, with a man whose last name 3 weeks earlier I wouldn't have known how to spell right. And even so, the air came into my lungs with an ease I didn't remember having known before. Damon opened his eyes. It took him a second to focus. When he focused, it was on me, directly, without hesitation, without calculation, as if he had woken up already looking. "Good morning," he said, his voice hoarse with sleep. "Good morning," I answered. He reached out and touched my face, slow, with the tips of his fingers. "How long have you been awake?" "I don't know." "Why didn't you wake me?" "Because I'd never seen you like this before." He looked at me for a long second. Then he pulled my hand to his mouth and kissed the back of it, slowly, without stopping looking at me. "I'll order coffee," he said. "Order it." He reached out, grabbed the house's internal phone, said 3 words to someone in the kitchen, and hung up. Then he settled back into the bed, and I rested my head on his chest, and he said nothing for a while, just ran his hand through my hair in a movement that seemed to already know the way. When the coffee arrived, it was Cassian who came up, which was strange, because Cassian didn't make coffee. He left the tray on the threshold of the door, knocked once, and left without coming in. Damon went to get it in his robe. He came back with the tray, sat on the edge of the bed, served mine first. We drank the coffee in silence. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that needs neither music nor words, the kind that only exists in houses where 2 people have stopped pretending. "I didn't know it could be like this," he said, low, after a while, without looking at me. I set down the cup. I looked at him. "Like what?" He took a while. He gave a small shrug, almost imperceptible. "Quiet. Good. Without having to hold anything in." I smiled. I didn't answer with words. I rested my head on his shoulder, closed my eyes, and allowed myself, for a brief instant, fleeting as a breath no one else hears, a single thought: if this piece were to fit inside me, would I know how to hold it? And then I smiled again, because the answer wasn't today, and maybe it didn't even need to be ever. Damon rested his chin on the top of my head. The sun rose slowly on the other side of the curtain, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't in any hurry to get up.